So Trump wants to make America great again, to be the export giant of the world, and we've heard this rhetoric time and time again. Now there's nothing wrong per se with trying to bring industry back to the United States. Scott Bessent has said many times that the US deficit is unsustainable. And he's absolutely right. The US economy is on an unsustainable trajectory. And if it doesn't get solved, the only outcome is a financial default. The US federal debt is on a nightmare path. In just a few years, we will be well past the levels during the Second World War, and on this projected path, the US national debt will go past well over 150%. It will be impossible to pay back bondholders, both foreign and domestic, and the only way out will be to print money. At the heart of this crisis is the US government spending too much and collecting too little revenue. And this is the crisis Trump faces today, and every US president in modern history. They've just made things worse, including himself in his first term. On the current path, we can see net interest payments go well past the original debt actually incurred. The can has been kicked down the road for far too long. By 2055, the US will be running budget deficits of 7.3%, and that's higher than what we have now by almost 100 basis points. Trump and Bessent clearly understand this. They are not stupid. The only way to prevent a default is to drop interest rates while trying to increase federal revenue and cut away government spending. And that's why we have Doge firing federal workers to cut down on costs. It's why we have the tariff war going on to raise revenue for the Trump White House. And the only way to bring interest rates down while inflation threatens to spike is to crush demand. And when demand is low enough, sure, we will eventually get disinflation. The rate of price increases will come down because people, they literally have no money left to spend. But realize what that means. An economic recession might be underway. Trump is firing on all cylinders and he's really impatient. 70% of the US economy is based on consumption. You cut that away, you're literally cutting away the legs of the entire system. Looking at the markets, the disaster is being priced in. Trump wants interest rates to come down and he will get it, but not because the economy is strong, but because the economy is weak. And these are the probabilities of the Fed rate cuts by the end of the year. Even though we are in a tariff war, the Federal Reserve is still expected to cut rates aggressively. By December, traders are pricing in a 99.4% of at least one rate cut. Nearly 95% they are betting on 2 rate cuts or more. The odds of 3 rate cuts, 3/4 of the market, they bet that the Fed will cut at least twice in 2024. But how can that be possible? Shouldn't tariffs increase prices? Yes, they will, but because the economy will be so shattered, rates will have to come down. Something has to give. You cannot have a big resurgence of inflation while interest rates still stay sky high and the economy not buckle. People's budgets simply can't withstand the hammering. A great example of US impatience is how they're handling the Russia-Ukraine situation. Now, we know Trump wants to end the war, which is a good thing, but he is not using the art of the deal here. He has telegraphed US agency to push for a resolution, but that means showing all your cards on the table. And now the US is facing a Ukraine who doesn't want to do a deal. The mineral deal isn't going to happen, not at least in its current form. Ukraine wants more investment dollars from Trump. Putin also just questioned Zelensky's legitimacy as Ukraine's president, and that made Trump lose his patience and lash out. Putin is winning on the battlefield, so he has the space, he has the time to really drag things out for a favorable resolution. Trump has a really tight timetable because he's trying to reset the US economy as fast as possible. But Russia doesn't really care. To Moscow, this is an existential issue. In response to Putin, Trump once again wants to pull out the sanctions card.
Just hours ago, President Trump called me to tell me he is, quote, pissed off with Russia's President Putin and threatened to impose secondary tariffs on Russia's oil. Quote, if Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if I think it was Russia's fault, I am going to put secondary tariffs on all oil coming out of Russia. Mr. Trump said 25% tariffs on Russian oil could happen any moment and told me he plans to speak with President Putin this week. The president told me, quote, I was very angry, pissed off when Putin started getting into Zelensky's credibility and started talking about new leadership in Ukraine.
So a 25% tariff, but not on Russia, is a secondary tariff on buyers of Russian oil. If you buy Russian crude, your imports into the US market will face a 25% import tax. But this is just silly. It will backfire and isolate the US even more. Who are the biggest buyers of Russian oil? Let's recap. It's China, it's India, and even Europe they're still buying. The US consumer market is valuable, but this act of impatience once again damages US credibility on the world stage. Russia is not going to see their energy revenues dip. Over the last 3 years, Russian crude exports have not collapsed at all. If anything, they have actually increased. Europe has stopped most of the crude imports from Moscow, but look at who's the biggest buyers in the world. It's Asia. Is Trump brave enough to punish the majority of the world? That's 60% of the world population here, and he will have to hammer bricks as well. US urgency has really morphed into unbridled impatience. Trump wants to shift attention away from Europe to China, especially on the economic front. But the more he lashes out, the deeper of a quagmire this drags the US into. So we can see a kind of desperation to threaten and impose tariffs to get his way. The auto, steel, and aluminum tariffs are a great example of big moves to shift global trade away. But this would only cause higher prices. There's a big disconnect even within the Trump administration. He's still feeding the American people the lie that tariffs are great.
Should Americans buy cars now if they want to avoid higher prices? And then just a follow-up.
No, I don't think so. I think you're going to have a country that's going to boom. I just spoke to Tim Cook of Apple. He's investing $500 billion in the United States, which he would have never, he told me, I would never have done it if you lost the election, and I would have never done it if there wasn't a tariff system that is a incentive for people to come. And remember, there are no tariffs. All you have to do is do your work right here.
Do you notice how Trump dodged the question? Play it back one more time. He was asked if Americans would buy cars now to avoid higher prices. Trump said no and then shifted focus on the news that Apple is investing $500 billion. Now, Apple's investment isn't confirmed. They could always rug pull away their plan, especially once Trump is no longer president. But let's leave Apple aside here. That also takes attention away from the fact that products will still cost much more in the United States. And as we said before, it won't be foreign exporters paying for America's reshoring of industry. It will be the US consumer that will forever be paying higher prices. In fact, Trump just admitted it. In an interview with NBC, he told the people that he doesn't care if prices rise. US consumers will start buying American cars because foreign vehicles will be priced out. But Trump is missing the obvious here. Prices are going to rise by at least 25% or more. And if households get priced out, they'll be too broke to buy anything else. They will simply cut back and not purchase a new car. That will cause consumption to collapse and still lead to a contracting economy. So we have a very confused administration today. Trump is either clueless or he wants to break the US economy for a very desperate reset. He might want to send the dollar crashing down and revamp the entire debt structure. And a recession will be the ultimate excuse to flood the economy with liquidity to drive the dollar down. Now, what's crazy is how things are being packaged to the US public. They're being sold a very bizarre narrative of how US tariffs are actually great for them.
You heard Lucas's reporting there where the president says he doesn't care if the prices go up on US cars. So what's the message to the US consumer?
The message is that tariffs are tax cuts, tariffs are jobs, tariffs are national security, tariffs are great for America, tariffs will make America great again.
I mean, this is crazy, isn't it? How many times can you be lied to? It's the first time in my life that I heard tariffs are tax cuts. The US imports a lot of goods from the world, especially China, that exports deflation to American consumers. Here's why what the White House just said is very misguided, and you should not believe it. Almost 47% of all vehicles sold in the US are imported. So 1 in 2 cars in the United States are brought into the country. Even cars made in the US also relies heavily on foreign parts. Trump's 25% tariff also impacts these imports. It's impossible for prices to come down. is going to soar much higher. This is not a tax cut. As bad as this sounds, it's much worse globally for Trump's economy. Now, the assumption was the world would bow down to US tariffs and they'll just buckle. But we are seeing a wave of anti-American sentiment spike through the roof. It is not just China or Russia that are wary of the US today. Major economies of allies, they are very angry with Trump, and as a result, they're starting to boycott US goods in a big way. Many countries in Europe are very pissed off at the Trump White House, especially regarding the trade war. Favorability ratings across the board, they have collapsed. Denmark is at 20%, while Sweden is at 29%. Even Germany and France, they are polling near the low 30s. How is this good for the US economy, who relies a lot on foreigners to buy their goods? We all see what's going on with Tesla today. Their sales are collapsing, and it's probably going to get much worse. It's across the board, and no government in the world can control what their people choose to buy or what not to buy. It's free will, and US companies could lose the world economy as a customer. Now consider global demand for electric vehicles. In 2025, this will grow by 30% to hit 22 million vehicles. The biggest consumers of cars will be China, Europe, and North America. However, because of the trade war, many foreign consumers will not buy Teslas, which is the only major US car export around. How can Tesla grow if the biggest markets, they are all walking away? Domestic consumers also have less purchasing power than ever before thanks to Trump's punishments. Sales across the board are going to continue to plunge. China will buy their own. They will also supply to Europe and other markets. After all, their cars are cheaper and more advanced than US vehicles. So the situation keeps getting worse. Besides direct tariffs, countries around the world have multiple ways to retaliate against US goods. Canada, for example, just froze their rebate payments to Tesla indefinitely. The subsidies are gone, which will push Tesla prices higher up north. In other words, Canadian consumers, they are being discouraged from buying Tesla vehicles. All this is the result of Trump's trade war. He has heavily miscalculated and imposed too many tariffs all at once. No consultation, no discussions, just outright punishments. But as we have seen, the world is not cooperating here, which means more counter tariffs and more punishments, they are coming for global US revenues. To reshore US industries, especially after decades of outsourcing, this is going to take a very long time. We are just being realistic here. Many countries already believe they are paying their fair share to the US. And let me explain. The world is using dollars in global trade, and many countries are still buying US bonds. This allows the United States to borrow money on the cheap. So in their perspective, they are already paying. Trump wants to force a grand bargain with the world, but it's not going to work today. We are in 2025 and countries are not as helpless as the US thinks. But let me know what you think. Will the US win its trade war, or will Trump be forced to backtrack on everything? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.